The November wind howled like a wounded animal across the Montana plains, carrying with it the scent of approaching snow and something else, something that made rancher Jake Morrison's blood run cold. He'd been checking the fence line when he saw her, a crumpled figure in the dirt beside the old country road that bordered his property. At first, he thought it was debris blown by the storm, but as his truck's headlights swept across the scene, the truth hit him like a physical blow. Woman lay motionless in the gravel, her dark hair matted with blood, her clothes torn and muddy. Purple bruises bloomed across her pale skin like violent flowers, and her breathing came in shallow, barely perceptible gasps. Jake's hands shook as he knelt beside her, his weathered fingers moving to check for a pulse. It was there, weak but steady, and relief flooded through him like a dam breaking. "Jesus," he whispered, his voice lost in the wind. Without hesitation, he shrugged off his heavy wool coat and wrapped it around her broken body, lifting her as gently as he would a newborn calf. She was so light, so fragile, that he feared she might shatter in his arms. The drive to his ranch house felt like an eternity. Jake kept glancing at the woman in his passenger seat, watching for any sign of consciousness, any indication that she was still fighting. Her face was a map of violent split lip, swollen eye, fingerprint bruises on her throat that made his jaw clench with rage. Someone had tried to kill her, had beaten her senseless and left her for dead on a deserted road where no one should have found her. But Jake had found her, and as he pulled into his driveway, the porch light casting long shadows across the yard, he made a silent vow that whoever had done this would pay. More importantly, he would make sure she survived. He would make sure she healed. Inside his modest ranch house, Jake cleared the kitchen table and laid her down as carefully as he could. The warmth of the house seemed to revive her slightly, and she stirred, a soft moan escaping her lips. Her eyes fluttered open, beautiful green eyes that held depths of pain he couldn't fathom. He murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You're safe now. I'm going to call for help." But as he reached for his phone, her hand shot out, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "No police, please." Jake studied her face, seeing the terror there, the desperate plea. He thought of his own past, of the times he'd needed sanctuary and found none. Slowly, he nodded. "Okay," he said. "No police, but I'm calling Doc Martinez. You need medical attention." She closed her eyes, tears leaking from the corners. "Thank you," she breathed. As Jake waited for the doctor, he sat beside her, his coat still wrapped around her shoulders. The storm raged outside, but inside, in the warm glow of his kitchen, something had shifted. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story, but he knew one thing, with absolute certainty. She was his responsibility now. Dr. Alina Martinez arrived within the hour, her medical bag clutched against her chest as she hurried through the storm. Jake had known Alina since high school, trusted her completely, and more importantly, knew she would ask no questions that didn't need answering. She took one look at the woman on his kitchen table, and her expression hardened. "Jake, this woman needs a hospital," Alina said, pulling on latex gloves. "These injuries are severe. Possible concussion, definitely broken ribs, and God knows what internal damage." "She won't go," Jake replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest. "She begged me not to call the police." Alina met his eyes, understanding passing. Between them, she'd seen this before, women who feared the system more than death itself. "Then we do this here," she said, rolling up her sleeves. "But I'll need your help." For the next 2 hours, they worked in careful silence. Alina cleaned and stitched wounds while Jake held the woman steady, whispering words of comfort when she cried out in pain. She drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling incoherently about someone named Marcus and pleading for forgiveness. 3 cracked ribs, mild concussion, and more bruises than I can count, Alina finally announced, peeling off her gloves. "But she lived. The question is, what happens when she wakes up properly?" Jake had already thought about that. "She can stay here. I've got the guest room, and she'll need time to heal." "Jake," Alina placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't know anything about this woman. She could be dangerous, could be running from something you don't want to get involved in." But Jake was already shaking his head. "Look at her, Alina. She's not dangerous. She's broken. And I'm not turning her out into the storm." After Alina left, Jake carried the woman to his guest bedroom, tucking her under clean sheets and placing a glass of water on the nightstand. She looked so small in his spare bed, surrounded by the quilts his grandmother had made. The bruises on her face were already darkening, and her breathing was shallow but steady. He settled into the chair beside the bed, determined to watch over her through the night. Somewhere around 3 a.m., she stirred, her eyes opening to find him there. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Jake Morrison," he said simply. "This is my ranch. You're safe here." She tried to sit up, wincing at the movement. "I should go. I shouldn't be here." "You're not going anywhere in this condition," Jake said firmly. "The storm's getting worse anyway. Rest. We'll talk in the morning." "I don't even know your name," she said, tears pooling in her eyes. "Sarah," she whispered after a long moment. "Sarah Chen." "Well, Sarah Chen, you're welcome to stay as long as you need." She closed her eyes, and Jake saw her shoulders shake with silent sobs. "He'll find me," she said. "He always finds me." Jake leaned forward, his voice low but fierce. "Not here. Not on my land. I promise you that." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because she nodded and settled back into the pillows. As dawn broke over the Montana mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Sarah slept peacefully for the first time in months, while Jake kept his vigil, already planning how he would keep his promise. 3 days passed before Sarah could walk without gasping in pain. Jake had moved through his morning routines quietly, checking on her between chores, bringing her meals on a tray. She ate little, but seemed to grow stronger each day, though she still flinched whenever he moved too quickly or spoke too loudly. The fourth morning, he found her sitting at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the horses in the pasture. She'd managed to dress herself in the clean clothes. Alina had brought jeans and a sweater that hung loose on her small frame. The bruises on her face had faded to yellow and green, but the haunted look in her eyes remained. "They're beautiful," she said without turning around. "The horses." Jake poured himself coffee and sat across from her. "That's Thunder and Lightning," he said, pointing to 2 chestnuts grazing near the fence. "Got them from a rescue. They were in." Sarah looked at him then, understanding flickering in her eyes. "Like me. Like you," he confirmed. "But they healed. Now, they're the best working horses I've ever had." She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers wrapped around her coffee mug. "I was married to Marcus for 3 years," she said finally. "I thought I loved him. I thought he loved me." Jake waited, knowing she needed to tell this story at her own pace. "It started small," she continued. "A slap when I burned dinner. A shove when I disagreed with him. He was so sorry afterward, so sweet. He bought me flowers, took me to dinner, promised it would never happen again. But it did happen again," Jake said quietly. "It got worse. Much worse. He controlled everything. My job, my friends, my family. I tried to leave twice. The first time, he found me at my sister's house. The second time," she touched her throat where the bruises had been, "he nearly killed me. Said if I ever tried to leave again, he'd make sure I disappeared permanently." Jake's hands tightened around his mug. "So you ran." "I ran. I took nothing but the clothes on my back and $50 I'd hidden in my sewing kit. I made it 3 states before he caught up to me." Her voice broke. "He was so angry. He beat me unconscious and left me on that road to die." "He won't find you here," Jake said with quiet conviction. "I won't let him." "You don't understand," Sarah said, panic creeping into her voice. "Marcus has money, connections. He's a successful businessman. People believe him when he says I'm unstable, that I'm a runaway wife who needs to be brought home." Jake reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. "Then we'll have to make sure he never gets the chance to tell that story." That afternoon, Jake found Sarah in the barn, gently stroking Lightning's nose. The horse, usually skittish around strangers, stood calmly under her touch. "She likes you," Jake observed, joining them. "I had a horse when I was little," Sarah said. "Before my parents died, I used to dream about having another one someday, living somewhere like this." She gestured around the barn. "Somewhere peaceful." "What changed?" Jake asked. "Life," she said simply. "Foster care, then college, then Marcus. I forgot how to dream about anything except surviving." Jake watched her profile as she continued to pet Lightning. The swelling in her face had gone down, revealing delicate features and a strength that hadn't been broken despite everything she'd endured. "Maybe it's time to start dreaming again," he said. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Sarah asked, "Why are you helping me? You don't know me. I could be everything Marcus says I am." Jake considered the question. "Do you remember what you said when you first woke up?" Sarah shook her head. "You said thank you. Someone who'd been through what you'd been through, beaten, and left for dead. And the first thing you did was thank me. That told me everything I needed to know about who you are." 2 weeks into Sarah's recovery, Jake's phone rang at dawn. He answered groggily, still half asleep in his chair by the fire, where he'd dozed off reading. Jake Morrison. The voice was smooth, cultured, with an underlying edge that made Jake's skin crawl. Who's asking? My name is Marcus Chen. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Jake was instantly alert. I don't know what you're talking about. My wife, Mr. Morrison. My beautiful, troubled wife, Sarah. She's been missing for 3 weeks now, and I'm beside myself with worry. The police have been useless, but I have reason to believe she might be in your area. Jake's grip tightened on the phone. Marcus's tone was all concern and wounded husband, but Jake could hear the steel beneath the silk. Like I said, I don't know what you're talking about. Mr. Morrison, I'm a reasonable man. My wife is unwell. She suffers from delusions, episodes where she believes people are trying to hurt her. She's dangerous to herself and others. I just want to get her the help she needs. If that's true, why haven't you filed a missing person report? There was a pause, and when Marcus spoke again, his voice was colder. I have my reasons, but let me be clear. I will find her. I have resources, connections. If you're harboring her, I suggest you contact me immediately. For everyone's sake. The line went dead. Jake sat in the pre-dawn darkness, his mind racing. He checked the locks on all the doors, then went to wake Sarah. She was already awake, sitting up in bed with her knees drawn to her chest. He called, didn't he? She whispered. Jake nodded. How did you know? I felt it. I always know when he's close. She was shaking now, her face pale. We have to leave. You don't understand what he's capable of. I'm not running, Jake said firmly. This is my land, my home, and you're under my protection. Jake, he'll hurt you. He'll hurt anyone who gets in his way. Let him try. That morning, Jake called Elena and asked her to come over. When she arrived, he explained the situation. Elena's expression grew grimmer with each detail. Jake, this is serious. If this man is as dangerous as Sarah says, you need to involve the authorities. She won't testify, Jake said. She's too scared, and honestly, I don't blame her. A rich man with connections against a woman with no family, no resources. How do you think that plays out? Elena looked at Sarah, who had remained silent throughout the conversation. What do you want to do? Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. I want to disappear. I want to cease to exist so he can't find me. That's not living, Jake said. That's just another kind of death. It's the only way to stay alive. Jake knelt beside her chair. What if there was another way? What if we could make sure he never bothered you again? How? I don't know yet, but I know people. Sarah. People who don't like bullies. People who believe in justice even when the law fails. Elena cleared her throat. Jake, be careful. Don't do anything that could make this worse. But Jake was already formulating a plan. Marcus Chen might have money and connections, but he was in Montana now. This was Jake's territory, and he played by different rules. That night, as Sarah slept fitfully, in the guest room, Jake sat at his kitchen table making phone calls. By morning, he had a network of information gathering around Marcus Chen, and what they found made his blood run cold. Sarah wasn't Marcus's first wife. The first one had died in a car accident, lone on a mountain road. No witnesses. The second had committed suicide at least. That's what the official report said. Now there was Sarah, wife number 3, who had run away from her loving husband. Jake realized that Sarah wasn't just running from an abusive husband. She was running from a killer. Marcus Chen arrived in town 3 days later, driving a sleek black Mercedes that looked out of place among the pickup trucks and farm equipment. He checked into the Riverside Inn, the nicest hotel in their small Montana town, and immediately began making inquiries. Jake heard about it within hours. Tom Bradley, who ran the feed store, called to warn him. City fellow with expensive clothes asking questions about a missing woman. Showed everyone a picture of a real pretty Asian lady. Said she was his wife, mentally ill, dangerous to herself. The same thing everyone else did. Haven't seen hide nor hair of anyone matching that description. But Jake, this guy's got cop written all over him. Military posture, eyes that missed nothing. I'd watch myself if I were you. Jake thanked Tom and hung up, his mind racing. He found Sarah in the garden behind the house, tending to the vegetables with an intensity that spoke of barely controlled panic. He's here, Jake said simply. Sarah's hand stilled on the tomato plants. I know. I can feel him. She looked up at Jake, tears streaming down her face. I have to go. Tonight, he can't find me here. Sarah, listen to me. Running didn't work before. It won't work now. He'll just keep hunting you. Then what do you suggest? She asked, her voice breaking. Wait here for him to kill me. Let him kill you too. Jake knelt beside her in the dirt. I suggest we turn the tables. Make him the hunted instead of the hunter. That evening, Jake's old army buddy, Sheriff Deputy Mike Reeves, came by for coffee. Mike had been asking questions around town about Marcus Chen, and what he'd learned was troubling. Guy's got a clean record, at least on paper, Mike said. But I made some calls to contacts back east. There are rumors, Jake, whispers about his first 2 wives, about his connections to some very unsavory people. What kind of connections? The kind that make people disappear when they become inconvenient. Sarah, who had been listening from the kitchen doorway, stepped forward. There's something else, she said quietly. Marcus keeps detailed records of everything. Photos, videos, financial records. He's obsessed with documentation. What kind of photos and videos? Jake asked, though he dreaded the answer. Everything he did to me. Every beating. Every humiliation. He said it was insurance. That if I ever tried to leave, or go to the police, he'd make sure everyone saw what a pathetic victim I was. Mike and Jake exchanged glances. Sarah, Mike said gently, if we could get our hands on those records, there in his laptop. He carries it everywhere, backs everything up to a secure server. Where's the server? His office. But it's impossible to access. The security is Jake stood up, pacing to the window. Maybe we don't need to access it. Maybe we just need to make him bring it to us. What do you mean? Marcus is a predator. He hunts when he thinks he has the advantage. But what if we could make him desperate? What if we could make him sloppy? The next morning, Jake did something that went against every protective instinct in his body. He drove into town and walked directly into the Riverside Inn. Marcus was sitting in the lobby, reading a newspaper, looking every inch the concerned husband. Mr. Chen, Jake said, extending his hand. I'm Jake Morrison. I believe you've been asking about me. Marcus looked up, his eyes sharp and calculating. Mr. Morrison, how good of you to come to me. I was just about to pay you a visit. Saves us both some time, Jake said, sitting down across from him. I understand you're looking for your wife. I am, and I have reason to believe you know where she is. Jake leaned back in his chair. What makes you think that? Because, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a whisper. I know she's been staying at your ranch, and I know you think you're protecting her. But you have no idea what you're dealing with. Enlighten me. Marcus smiled, and Jake felt ice in his veins. Sarah is mine, Mr. Morrison. She will always be mine. And anyone who tries to keep her from me will discover just how far I'm willing to go to get her back. Jake stood up slowly. Is that a threat? It's a promise. That night, Jake sat Sarah down and explained his plan. Her face went white as she listened, her hands shaking as she gripped her coffee cup. You want to use me as bait, she said when he finished. I want to give you your life back, Jake replied. This is the only way to stop him permanently. And, if it doesn't work, if he kills us both, then at least we'll have tried. Sarah, you can't keep running. He'll never stop. And eventually, he'll catch you when you don't have anyone to protect you. Sarah was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the darkening sky. What if I'm not strong enough? She whispered. You're the strongest person. I know, Jake said. You survived 3 years with him. You survived being beaten and left for dead. You're still here, still fighting. That's not weakness, Sarah. That's courage. The next morning, Jake called Marcus's hotel room. I want to make a deal, he said when Marcus answered. I'm listening. My ranch. Tonight at midnight. Come alone, and I'll give you what you want. And what guarantee do I have that this isn't a trap? You don't. But you also don't have a choice. This is the only way you're getting near her. There was a pause. If you're lying to me, Morrison, if this is some kind of setup, Midnight, Jake said, and hung up. Sarah spent the day in a state of controlled terror, jumping at every sound, checking and rechecking the plan. Mike Reeves had positioned himself and 2 other deputies in strategic locations around the ranch, all equipped with night vision and recording equipment. Remember, Mike told them both, we need him to confess. We need him to admit what he's done, on record. Otherwise, it's just his word against yours. As the sun set, Jake and Sarah took their positions. She would be in the barn, visible through the open door, but protected by the shadows. Jake would be in the house, close enough to help if things went wrong. Jake, Sarah said as they waited. If something happens to me, ... Nothing's going to happen to you. But if it does, I want you to know. These past few weeks, living here with you, it's been the happiest I've been in years. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever. What's that? Hope. At 11:58 p.m., headlights swept across the ranch yard. Marcus's Mercedes pulled up slowly, and Jake watched through the window as the man who had terrorized Sarah stepped out into the moonlight. Marcus was tall, well-dressed, and moved with the confidence of someone who had never been denied anything he wanted. He walked directly to the barn, where Sarah stood silhouetted in the doorway. "Hello, darling," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly in the still night air. "Did you miss me?" Sarah's voice was steady, stronger than Jake had expected. "Hello, Marcus. You've caused me a lot of trouble, Sarah. A lot of expense. I'm very disappointed in you. I'm not coming back with you." Marcus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, but you are. You see, I've done some research on your cowboy friend. He's got a nice little operation here, but he's also got debts. Significant debts. It would be a shame if something happened to his credit rating, or his livestock, or his house. You can't threaten him." "I can do whatever I want," Marcus said, stepping closer. "I own you, Sarah. I've always owned you. And now I'm going to remind you what happens when you disappoint me." He reached into his coat, and Jake saw the glint of metal. A gun. Jake was already moving. But Marcus was faster than he'd expected. The shot echoed across the ranch yard like thunder. Sarah screamed as the gunshots shattered the night silence. But it wasn't her voice that cut through the darkness. It was a He staggered backward, clutching his shoulder, his weapon clattering to the ground. "You shot me," he gasped, looking around wildly. "You actually shot me. Drop the gun and step away from her." Sheriff Deputy Mike Reeves emerged from the shadows, his service weapon trained on Marcus. Now Marcus's eyes darted between Mike and Sarah, his face twisted with rage and pain. "This is kidnapping. She's my wife. I have every right to." "You have the right to remain silent," Mike said, moving closer. "I suggest you use it." But Marcus wasn't finished. As Mike approached, he lunged for his dropped weapon. The movement sent Jake sprinting from the house, but Sarah was closer. Without thinking, she grabbed a pitchfork from the barn wall and swung it hard, catching Marcus in the ribs and sending him sprawling. "That's for every time you hit me," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "Every time you made me feel worthless. Every time you made me beg for mercy." Marcus looked up at her from the ground, blood seeping through his expensive shirt. "You think this is over? You think hiding behind these country bumpkins will protect you?" "I'm not hiding anymore," Sarah said, and Jake heard something new in her voice strength. Resolve. The sound of someone who had finally found her power. Mike cuffed Marcus and read him his rights, while Jake helped Sarah to the house. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes were clear. "Is it really over?" she asked. "Not yet," Jake said. "But it's a start." The next morning brought a parade of law enforcement officials to the ranch. FBI agents, county prosecutors, and investigators from 3 different states. It turned out that Marcus's laptop, which had been in his car, contained more than just documentation of his abuse of Sarah. Agent Patricia Hendricks, the lead FBI investigator, sat across from Sarah at Jake's kitchen table. "Mrs. Chen, what we found on your husband's computer is extensive. Photos and videos of abuse, financial records showing payments to various criminals, and most importantly, evidence linking." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "He killed them." "We believe so. The evidence is compelling enough to charge him with 2 counts of murder, as well as attempted murder, domestic violence, and a host of other crimes." "What does this mean for Sarah?" Jake asked. "It means she's going to be our star witness. And it means Marcus Chen is going to spend the rest of his life in prison." That afternoon, as the investigators packed up their equipment, Sarah stood in the garden where she'd spent so many peaceful hours. Jake found her there, staring at the mountains in the distance. "I keep thinking about his other wives," she said quietly. "Lisa and Jennifer. They weren't as lucky as I was." "You made it possible for them to get justice," Jake said. "Their families, finally, have answers." "I could have died on that road," Sarah said. "I should have died, but you found me." "I found you because you're meant to be here," Jake said. "Because you're meant to live." Sarah turned to face him, and Jake saw that the haunted look in her eyes had been replaced by something else. Peace. Maybe, or the beginning of it. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you get to choose," Jake said. "For the first time in years, You get to decide what you want your life to look like. Sarah looked around the ranch at the horses grazing in the pasture, at the house where she'd learned to feel safe again, at the man who had risked everything to save her. I want to stay, she said, if you'll have me. Jake's heart swelled with emotion he'd been holding back for weeks. Sarah, I've been hoping you'd say that since the day I found you. That evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset, the same view they'd shared so many times over the past month. But everything was different now. The fear was gone, replaced by possibility. I want to learn to ride, Sarah said suddenly. Lightning would love that, Jake said. She's been asking about you, and I want to help with the ranch. Really help, not just tend the garden. I could use a partner, Jake said carefully. Sarah looked at him, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. What kind of partner? Any kind you want to be? 3 months later, Sarah stood in the middle of the corral, Lightning's reins in her hands, while Jake watched from the fence. The horse nuzzled Sarah's shoulder affectionately, and she laughed a sound that had become more frequent as the weeks passed. She's testing you, Jake called out. Show her who's boss. Sarah swung up into the saddle with growing confidence. The first few weeks of riding lessons had been tentative, careful, but now she moved with natural grace. Lightning responded to her touch, trotting around the corral in smooth circles. I think she likes having another female around, Sarah said, guiding the horse over to where Jake stood. Someone who understands what it's like to be gentle. Jake reached up to stroke Lightning's neck. She's not the only one. The trial had been set for the following month. Sarah had spent countless hours with prosecutors, going over her testimony, preparing for the grueling cross-examination that would come. Marcus's lawyers were trying every angle to discredit her, but the evidence was overwhelming. Agent Hendricks had called the night before with an update. 2 more women have come forward, she'd told Sarah. Girlfriends from before his first marriage. They're willing to testify about his pattern of abuse. Sarah had cried after that call, not from sadness, but from relief. She wasn't alone anymore. She wasn't the only one willing to speak the truth. Jake, she said now, dismounting from Lightning, I need to ask you something. He turned to face her, noting the serious expression on her face. What is it? When this is all over, when the trial is finished and Marcus is convicted, what happens to us? Jake had been wondering the same thing. These months of living together, of healing together, had created something neither of them had expected. It wasn't just gratitude on Sarah's part, or protectiveness on his. It was deeper than that, more complicated. I don't know, he said honestly. I know what I hope happens. What do you hope? I hope you stay. I hope you let me love you the way you deserve to be loved. I hope we build something real together. Sarah stepped closer to him. I'm scared, she admitted. I don't know how to be in a relationship that isn't based on fear. Then we'll learn together, Jake said. No pressure, no expectations, just ... us, figuring it out as we go. Sarah reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the lines around his eyes. I love you, she said quietly. I think I've loved you since the night you wrapped your coat around me. Jake's heart stopped. Sarah, ... I know it's complicated. I know I have baggage, trauma, things I need to work through. But I also know that you make me feel safe in a way I never thought possible. Jake pulled her into his arms, holding her close. I love you too. More than I ever thought I could love anyone. They stood there in the corral, surrounded by the horses and the wide Montana sky, holding each other as the sun set behind the mountains. For the first time in either of their lives, the future felt full of possibility instead of fear. That night, Sarah made dinner while Jake finished the evening chores. It was a routine they'd fallen into, comfortable and domestic, like they'd been doing it for years instead of months. I got a call from Alina today, Sarah said as they sat down to eat. She wants to know if I'd be interested in helping at the clinic. Part-time, just answering phones and doing basic administration. That's great, Jake said. Do you want to do it? I think I do. I need to start building my own life, my own identity. I've been Sarah the victim for so long, I forgot who I was. Before Marcus. Who were you before Marcus? Sarah thought for a moment. I was a teacher. Elementary school. I loved working with kids, seeing their faces light up when they learned something new. Maybe you could do that again someday. Maybe, Sarah said. But first, I need to learn how to be just Sarah, not Marcus's wife, not a victim, not someone who needs protecting. Just ... me. Jake reached across the table and took her hand. I can't wait to meet her. The courthouse in Billings was packed the morning Marcus Chen's trial began. Sarah sat in the front row, flanked by Agent Hendricks and the prosecutor, her hands folded in her lap. She wore a simple blue dress that Alina had helped her choose, professional, but not showy. Confident, but not defiant. Marcus sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, his shoulder healed from the gunshot wound. He'd lost weight during his months in jail, and his face had taken on a gaunt, hollow look. But his eyes were the same, cold, calculating, predatory. "Are you ready for this?" Agent Hendricks whispered. Sarah nodded, though her heart was pounding. She'd practiced her testimony dozens of times. But facing Marcus in court felt different than facing him in the safety of Jake's ranch. The prosecutor, District Attorney Rebecca Martinez, stood to deliver her opening statement. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, over the next few days, you're going to hear about a man who systematically terrorized 3 women. A man who used his wealth, his charm, and his connections to abuse, control, and ultimately murder 2 innocent women. And you're going to hear from the woman who survived him." Marcus's defense attorney, a slick-talking lawyer from Denver, painted a different picture. "My client is a successful businessman who loved his wives deeply. The evidence you'll hear is circumstantial at best, and Sarah Chen is an unstable woman who fabricated these stories to cover up her own mental illness." When Sarah took the stand, the courtroom was silent. She looked out at the gallery and saw Jake sitting in the 3rd row, his eyes steady and encouraging. She drew strength from his presence. "Mrs. Chen," Martinez began, "tell the jury about your marriage to the defendant." Sarah's voice was clear and strong as she recounted the years of abuse. She described the escalating violence, the isolation, the fear that had consumed her life. She told them about the beatings, the threats, the final night when Marcus had tried to kill her. "He said if I ever tried to leave him, he'd make sure I disappeared," Sarah testified. "He said he'd done it before, and he'd do it again." During cross-examination, Marcus's lawyer tried to rattle her, questioning her memory, her motives, her mental state. But Sarah remained calm, answering each question with quiet dignity. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Chen, that you have a history of mental illness?" "I have a history of trauma," Sarah replied. "Trauma inflicted by your client." "And isn't it true that you fabricated these allegations to avoid responsibility for your own actions?" Sarah looked directly at Marcus for the first time since the trial began. "The only thing I fabricated was happiness. For 3 years, I pretended to be happy while your client systematically destroyed my soul." The courtroom was dead silent. Several jurors were visibly moved, and Sarah saw one woman wiping away tears. The prosecution presented Marcus's laptop, the photos and videos of his abuse, the financial records showing payments to criminals. They brought in expert witnesses, who testified about the pattern of escalating violence, the psychological profile of a serial abuser. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Marcus's own arrogance had been his downfall. He'd kept detailed journals, documenting not just his abuse of Sarah, but his. Lisa was too weak. One entry read, "She broke too easily." Jennifer had more fight in her, but she was ultimately disappointing. Sarah shows the most promise. She has a strength that makes breaking her more satisfying. Agent Hendricks testified about the evidence linking Marcus to the deaths of his first 2 wives. Cell phone records placed him at the scene of Lisa's accident. Financial records showed he'd paid off the coroner who'd ruled Jennifer's death a suicide. "This man is a predator," Agent Hendricks told the jury. "He hunted these women, trapped them, and when they threatened to expose him, he killed them." On the final day of testimony, Marcus took the stand in his own defense. It was a mistake that would seal his fate. "I loved my wives," he said, his voice smooth and practiced. "Sarah is sick, delusional. She needs help, not jail time for her husband." But under cross-examination, his mask began to slip. Martinez pressed him about the photographs, the videos, the journals. "These are private moments between a husband and wife," Marcus said, his voice rising. "You have no right to judge what happens in my marriage." "Private moments," Martinez held up a photograph. "You call beating your wife until she's unconscious a private moment." "She needed discipline," Marcus snapped, and the courtroom erupted. It was over. In that moment, Marcus had shown the jury exactly who he was, man who believed he had the right to discipline his wife with violence. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, guilty on all counts. The foreman announced. Sarah closed her eyes and felt a weight she'd carried for years finally lift from her shoulders. Jake was beside her in an instant, pulling her into his arms as she sobbed with relief. Marcus was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the bailiff led him away, He turned to look at Sarah one last time. But instead of the fear she'd always seen in his eyes when he looked at her, there was something else to feed. "It's over," Sarah whispered to Jake as they left the courthouse. "It's finally over." "No," Jake said, taking her hand. "It's just beginning." 1 year later, Sarah stood in the same spot where Jake had found her, that stormy November night. But everything was different now. The road had been repaved. Wildflowers bloomed along the shoulders. And Sarah wore a simple white dress that caught the Montana breeze. "You sure about this?" Jake asked, straightening his tie. He looked nervous, which made Sarah smile. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she said. The wedding was small, just close friends, and the people who had become Sarah's chosen family. Alina served as maid of honor. Agent Hendricks came down from D.C. And even gruff Sheriff Deputy Mike Reeves had tears in his eyes as he watched them exchange vows. "Do you, Sarah Chen, take Jake Morrison to be your husband?" "I do," Sarah said, her voice strong and clear. "I choose you, Jake. Every day. For the rest of my life, I choose you." Jake's voice was thick with emotion as he spoke his vows. "Sarah, you came into my life broken and lost, and you taught me that love isn't about rescuing someone. It's about choosing to walk beside them while they rescued themselves. You saved yourself, and in doing so, you saved me too." As they kissed, sealing their union, Sarah felt the last of her old life fall away. She was no longer Sarah Chen, the victim, the survivor. She was Sarah Morrison, the woman who had found her strength, her voice, her home. The reception was held in the barn, where Sarah had learned to ride, where she'd found peace among the horses Jake had rescued. As they danced to their first song, Sarah looked around at the faces of the people who had become her family. "Penny for your thoughts," Jake murmured as they swayed together. "I was thinking about that first night," Sarah said. "When you found me on the road, I was so broken, so lost. I thought my life was over, and now I know it was just beginning." Later, as the guests were leaving, Sarah found herself alone with Alina in the kitchen. "I have something for you," Alina said, handing her a small wrapped package. Inside was a photo Sarah on Lightning, taken just a few weeks earlier. She was laughing, her face turned toward the sun, her hair flying in the wind. She looked completely, utterly free. "I wanted you to have this," Alina said, "so you never forget who you became." Sarah hugged the photo to her chest. "I won't forget. I'll never forget." As the sun set over the ranch, Sarah and Jake sat on their porch, now watching the horses graze in the pasture. Sarah's hand rested on her stomach, where a small life was just beginning to grow. "Do you think we'll be good parents?" she asked. Jake took her hand. "I think we'll be honest parents. We'll teach our children that love doesn't hurt, that strength comes from surviving, and that sometimes the best families are the ones you choose. And if it's a girl, we'll teach her to be strong, to never accept less than she deserves, to fight for herself and for others who can't fight. And if it's a boy, we'll teach him to be gentle, to protect without controlling, to love without possessing." Sarah leaned against Jake's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too," Jake replied. "Welcome home, Sarah Morrison." As the stars appeared in the vast Montana sky, Sarah closed her eyes and made a silent promise to the women who hadn't survived, to the girl she used to be, and to the child growing inside her. She would never again allow anyone to make her feel small. She would never again accept cruelty as love. She would never again forget that she was worthy of happiness, of safety, of genuine love. The road where Jake had found her that night was now just a memory. But the woman who had been beaten and left there to die had become something beautiful, something powerful, something whole. She had found her way home, and she was never leaving again. Epilogue. 5 years later, stood in her classroom, watching her third-grade students work on their art projects. She'd returned to teaching 2 years earlier, and every day reminded her why she'd loved it so much. "Mrs. Morrison," little Emma raised her hand. "Can you help me with my family tree?" Sarah knelt beside the 8-year-old girl, noting the careful way she'd drawn her adoptive parents, her biological siblings scattered across different homes. "Family trees can look different for everyone," Sarah said gently. "Some people have big branches, some have small ones. Some people have families they're born into, and some have families they choose. Like you chose, Mr. Morrison." Sarah smiled. "Exactly like that. And like Daddy and I chose each other, we chose you too." Emma beamed. She'd been placed with Sarah and Jake 6 months earlier, a scared 8-year-old who'd been through the foster system. Sarah had recognized the fear in the little girl's eyes, The way she flinched from sudden movements. Is baby Thomas part of my family tree too? Sarah looked over at her 2-year-old son, playing quietly in the corner of the classroom. What do you think? I think he's my brother now, Emma said decisively. And lightning is my horse, and thunder is Daddy's horse, and we're all family. That afternoon, Sarah drove home to find Jake teaching Emma how to mend a fence, while Thomas toddled around the yard, chasing chickens. It was chaos, and it was beautiful, and it was everything Sarah had never dared to dream of. How was school? Jake asked, kissing her hello. Perfect, Sarah said. Absolutely perfect. As the sun set over their ranch, their family gathered on the porch. Emma curled up against Sarah's side, while Thomas slept in Jake's arms. The horses grazed peacefully in the pasture, and the mountains stood guard over their little piece of paradise. Sarah thought about the woman who had been left for dead on a dark road years ago. That woman couldn't have imagined this life, this love, this wholeness. But she had survived, and in surviving, she had created something beautiful. I love you, Jake said quietly, his words carrying on the evening breeze. I love you too, Sarah replied. All of you, always. And in the vast Montana sky, the stars shone down on a family that had been built not on blood or obligation, but on choice, on healing, and on the radical belief that everyone deserves to be loved exactly as they are. The rancher's coat that had once wrapped around a broken woman now hung in the closet of a home filled with laughter and light. And Sarah Morrison, teacher, wife, mother, and survivor,